Okay, so we're continuing on Daf Lamed Ches Omid Beis in the third parak of Bava Metzia, where we just concluded a part of a sugya. We're going to pick it up, but the Mishnah that we are continually talking about deals with someone who gives, in this case, payros or any pikadon to his friend to hold, and it's a pikadon that is fungible, like food, for instance, and it starts deteriorating. We have an ongoing discussion on machlokes from a number of different angles, whether or not that shomer, that person who's holding on to it, has to just leave it and let it go, or whether he can do something with it, sell it, or whatever, in order to preserve the keren. So we've gone through a number of different iterations and machlokes as to how we view this matter. It's not such an easy matter to get your arms around. And on Lamed Ches Omid Beis last week, we came to, I wouldn't say a conclusion, but we did have a machlokes between and again, last week we focused on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who is the seif of the Mishnah, who says that mochrin, and the Gemara wanted to understand and more in depth from Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel why he says it. And of course, then we pose the halacha that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is the incisor for most halachas in all of Shas, except for a few. So in our Mishnah, the halacha should be like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that you are able to sell it or do something with it to prevent it from total deterioration. Now, at the very end of our sugya, the Gemara introduced another brisa for comparison, and that's the brisa of whether or not if someone has a piece of property and he leaves the country, let's just say he leaves the country, they use the term shavu, he's a captive. In other words, it may have been in a military situation where he was a captive and he no longer has control of his property, or just someone goes overseas. In those days, that was like, he's gone forever, a year, whatever, because it took so long. So in a sense, the property doesn't have control, doesn't have an owner, because no one's here. What decisions are made? So the Gemara touches on that, and that's what we're going to pick up on now in greater depth. What is this whole discussion about a captive, quote unquote captive, meaning someone's not here, and how does that play in to whether or not that changes the discussion as to whether or not you're allowed to do something with the property? Memela, if the owner is around and you say that he doesn't say anything, or he does say something, we understand how the winds shift. But if there's no one here to say anything, that adds another layer of complexity, because now you have to impute what should happen. It's not enough that the owner is here and says or doesn't say anything. And remember, shtika, not saying anything, is also saying something if you don't even want to weigh in. But if you don't have the capability of weighing in because you're not here, that's a whole different approach. So that's what our Gemara is now going to touch on, is for us to understand what this means when you have a captive, or in the larger sense, an ownerless, a property that doesn't have a hands-on owner, and what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, Rabbi, excuse me.
Yeah.
This whole model with payros, is it just an example? So if other things deteriorate over time or lose value, like somebody says, I want you to watch my car, I'll be away for months or a year or whatever, the depreciation of other items is it equivalent to the deterioration of payros, and this becomes the model for anything that loses value as a function of time?
Yes, yeah. So the Rashi on the Mishnah, it gives us a little bit of a clue, because it says, when speaking about payros, it talks about animals like rats or other things that can attack the produce and destroy it. But I think your point is well taken, is that if there are things that are going to depreciate in value and someone has the ability to prevent that loss, then the it should be the same thing. And of course, today we can think of so many different things.
Yeah.
Back in the day, there probably weren't too many other things other than foodstuffs that really lost value, because I mean, what was it? I mean, they didn't have all that many different types of items. So the answer would be pretty much yes, that this is a model for something that that can depreciate, can lose value. And what obligations do you have to protect your fellow man, that he shouldn't lose, more than what would be considered the norm? Because remember, the Gemara does say that there is a certain norm that is acceptable, whatever it is, and we're going to learn that in the next daf or so. It could be 10%, it could be a little bit more, that is allowable. But beyond that, now you're talking about serious money, so you should really try to protect the Baal almost at any cost, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Tanakama, the Rabbanim, of course, argue. So yeah, that is a good point. So
I thought this model presupposed that that there was no caretaker to begin at all, and that through no fault of his own, the owner is gone. So it's tantamount to being functionally hefker. So you gotta, appoint ideally someone to do something. I thought that was what this model presupposes.
Well, it only in the sense that there is an owner around and we can't necessarily reach him, or we don't know where he is. Again, the reason why we're now about to embark on a sort of a different direction is because you're going to see in a minute the differences and the seriousness of a property in which the owner is totally unavailable. So you're right. We're making an assumption we can't reach this owner, but in our minds, we know the owner's around. Okay, so in other words, we're thinking we can't reach him. What do we do? Because we can't call him. Maybe we'll reach him in a day or two, and then it might be too late. So our mindset is very short term. We got to help this guy because he's around or not around. Remember, the whole Mishnah talks about, even in the interpretation of Nachman bar Yitzchak, what does he say? The fellow is giving Truma and Meiser from his property here to his property, we said somewhere up in Connecticut or whatever. That means he's around. He's around. He's doing things. We just can't reach him. We can't ask him a question, but he's around doing things. So he wants to, let's say, give Truma Meiser from this property to that property, and we're afraid that if we sell this property before he gives Truma Meiser, it'll be tevel, on and on and on. But he's semi-actively participating in his own affairs. We see that from the Gemara, just from the discussion. We're about to embark on a discussion where he is completely out of sight. And now the question is, does that matter? Okay, all right. So the Gemara is about to introduce this question of shavui, of captive, which by definition means he is not at all available, period. And even if we wanted to try to reach him, we couldn't. Here, Chachik, in our situation up till now, the Mishnah is telling us that, yeah, he's not here, we can't get him, but maybe if we try harder, or he's weighing in and he's saying to his shaliach there, I want to give Truma Maser. So there is some interaction. Our question is, do we leave it alone or do we jump in and help? So you're right to a certain degree, but in the back of your mind, keep in mind that there is some potential contact available with this fellow. We're about to say no contact, and does it matter? That's really the shaila. So let's go into this. It's about the fifth line from in the wide lines. Itmar. Okay, so the Gemara tells us, the Gemara addressed and says, Itmar, shavui shenishba. What does that mean? Someone became a captive. Remember, I'm using the word captive loosely because it doesn't mean he was necessarily a captive, that he was conquered or that he was arrested or something. This is a definition for that he's not at all available. But we're going to use the term shavui because that's the Gemara's term. Itmar shavui shenishba. Rav Oma ein maridin karav l'nechasav. Shmuel Oma maridin karav l'nechasav. Here we have an interesting machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. You have to listen to this machlokes because it's It's an interesting machlokes, maybe on family dynamics. Family dynamics. Why? Rav says, so the question is this, not you or me, who are good friends, or we know the guy, don't know. What about his nephew? What about his cousin? What about a Korav, a real relative to the person who is not available? Can you allow a Korav to come into the property to help manage the property? Now, when you say the word Korav, you instantly think about, oh, wait a minute. This is a family issue, and you have someone who potentially has a connection to the land, right? Because he's a Korav. When you think of a Korav, you think of inheritance, or you think of some kind of relationship other than just, I'm a really good friend. But what shaykhs do I have to the property? A Korav has a shaykhs to the property. So now we're already stepping up, and we're asking, what about a Korav? Can a Korav step in? So listen to this machlokes. There's a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, and Rav says, Ein morid and Korav. You're not allowed to let a Korav into the property to handle the property while the person is, quote, in captivity. And Shmuel's more lenient, and he says, morid and Korav nechasa, that you're allowed to put a Korav in charge of his nechasim. So let's stop a minute. What do you think the source of this machlokes is? Why is there a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel about a Korav? So let's take a look, see if Rashi enlightens us. Korav, says Rashi, Horoi liyorsho and Korav mimenu. We're talking about a Korav who is, in other words, he is a potential inheritor, and there's no one closer than him. So let's say the fellow had no children, but he had a nephew, and the nephew was the closest relative. So that's the nephew. So we're talking about that Korav. Can that nephew come in and handle the property and make decisions on the property? That's the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Okay. Now, so we're going to get into the underlying reason, but let's just go a little bit further. There's two options to this fact pattern. One is the sheshama bo shemeis, when the rumor is, you know what, unfortunately, the shavoi, he died. You know, he passed away in captivity. Now there's no one left. Says the Gemara, kol alma lo pligi de moridin. Even Rav admits moridin, that the nephew can come in because there is nobody and this fellow's not around. So now it's time. I mean, it's not going to be hefker because there is a family matter. If there is a family, okay. So we have one shita that says that when we heard rumor that he died, lo pligi, Rav admits to Shmuel that you can allow the Korav in. Ki pligi, when do Rav and Shmuel dispute? B'sheshalo shomabo shemes. The fellow is gone, and we don't hear anything. It's completely silent. We don't know what happened to him. Is he alive? Is he not alive? What should we do with this property? So now we're going to understand the machlokes. Rav Omar, Rav says, you know what? We don't hear a word. Ein moridin. We don't allow the Korav to come in. Dilma mafsad lahu. You hear this? Rav is afraid that this nephew relative is going to come in and destroy the property. Why will he destroy? What's the havamina here? Why would he destroy the property? So let's think about this a minute. He's the only relative. We don't know whether the guy's alive or he's not alive. And we're saying, Rav says, you can't come in because he may destroy the property. So let's look at Rashi. B'sheshama bo shemeis, when they heard he died, kol alma lo pligi de moridin, that you are allowed, even according to Rav. Says Rashi, D'im yavohu habalim kodim sheocha. Let's say the rumor was false. Let's say he didn't die. We heard he died, right? But let's say he didn't die. So worst comes to worst. D'im yavohu habalim kodim sheochel ze haperus. Let's say that the rumor mill said he died, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, no, he didn't die. He's on his way back. So what is going to happen to this nephew? The worst that will happen is, okay, he's going to start tending the property. Yitl zeh kishar arisin v'yachzor hashar. This relative will be treated as a sharecropper. A sharecropper probably had a standard wage in those days. In other words, he got paid by the piece or by the hour. However, a sharecropper gets paid. V'yachzor hashar, and he returns the rest to the owner. So there's two options. Either he died or he didn't die. If he didn't die and there was a false rumor and he's tending to the property properly, he gets paid. No sweat. He will not lose here because he'll get paid like a sharecropper. Presumably that's a reasonable wage. But if in fact the guy died, then he's the Yerush and he gets everything. That's why Rav admits you can allow the fellow in, because no matter what, the Korov knows I'm going to get paid here. In other words, either I'll work the property and get paid, or I'll own the property. However, mafsid lahu, but if below yazbala karkas v'yisra tomed yachtishe, if we know nothing about the owner, did he die, did he not die, then here's what Rav's afraid of. Rav's afraid that this individual is going to say, you know what, I don't know what my status is. Let me grab what I can while I can. So he is going to bleed that property dry. He's not going to properly fertilize. He's not going to properly let it lie fallow. He's going to try to pull everything out of the property as quickly as he can, because he's afraid that the owner is going to come back and then he'll have nothing. So Rav is choshed that this Yerush does not have the best interests of the property in mind, and therefore he will do things that will potentially destroy the property. That's why Rav says in the beginning, I don't want him to come down, because if he comes down, he may destroy the property. That's Rav's thinking.
He may also want to build condominiums, and he doesn't care about the Beirut.
We don't know. So basically, he's choshed that this guy will not have the best interests of the property at heart. However you want to, give an explanation.
Any kind of option.
Why have we discussed everything but his expertise in this particular area? Yeah, he may have invested financial interests, call a kavod, but if he doesn't know what he's doing, agriculturally, what difference does it make?
And that's what, so Rav casts a wide net of concern that if it's a relative who has some potential interest in the property, and we don't know if the guy really died or not, that he'll take advantage and do everything to the property to cash out today and maybe leave a very shallow or hollowed out or destroyed property that's going to take a long time to rehabilitate. That's Rav's thinking. Rav doesn't believe that the Yerush, the potential Yerush, is going to have the best interests of the property at heart. That's why he takes a hardline position and says, don't allow him in. Now, if there is clear indication that the guy died, well, he's the Yerush. I can't not allow him in. He's the Yerush. But if there's a havamina that guy is alive, I'm not going to give him license to come in. In other words, Rav, for some reason, is harsher on the Korov than he might be on a stranger. Because if it was a stranger who was taking care of the property, according to Rav, he'd probably work it like a normal worker and get paid, because he has no vested interest that he's going to get this property. So I'll come in and I'll work the property. And I know the custom is, and when someone comes in and works property, he gets paid properly by the hour, by the piece, whatever it is. But for some reason, when it comes to a karev, now maybe that's a lesson for us, that, according to Rav, that a karev isn't always the most welcome into the property. Shmuel, on the other hand, doesn't take that view. Shmuel is very liberal, and he says, you know what? We have a karev here, and this karev clearly will do what's in the best interest of the property. Therefore, I allow him in. And to me, it makes no difference whether or not he died. If there's a rumor he died, he didn't die, or he's alive. He is the best person to take care. Why? Let's look at the next line of the Gemara, because the Gemara says, Shmuel Amma Maritin Kiven de Amma Mar, because Shmuel says, Shaminin Lehu Ka'aris, that at the very worst, we evaluate him like a sharecropper. Well, mafsid lahu. In other words, Shmuel takes a very practical approach. A fellow who comes in, yeah, he has an interest in the property, but you know what? We're not chayshid that he's going to destroy the property, because at the very least, he's going to get paid like a sharecropper, like someone who works the property, and it's a fair wage. So he's not going to do anything terrible. If, on the other hand, the fellow really died, then he's the proper Yerush. So it's a basic machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to what are the motives of the relative. Rav casts a shadow that his motives aren't so honorable, and Shmuel says no, it's fine. Says Rashi, given to Omar Mar Lekamon later on, the Kulam Shaman Luhu Ka'aris. They automatically consider him like a sharecropper. And the other Habalin, Shaman Lazeh Chelko B'chol Shana Sha'avad, will evaluate his chelek for all the years, all the time that he spent, Sha'avad Ba, Keminig Arisa Ha'ir, in Mechza, in Shlish, in Revia. So again, Shmuel takes the more practical approach, and he says that what is the minig of the place, and he is treated like the minig of the place. If it turns out that the fellow really did die, then he's the right guy anyway. So that is the basic.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
I don't think he's the right guy. So if it's a matter of Yoresh, you have a different set of issues. Who are those who are going to inherit? Wouldn't you look differently if you think the guy may be dead or can't be located? Because the Yorshim have specific rights there. So to have just any Karo get in the middle to maintain the property is different than if you have a concern that he's dead. So the search, wouldn't it be more intense because you have to carry out the wishes of the mace in terms of Yershus to because it's more medactic and it follows a line of who inherits and so forth.
right. So you would be right, Michael, except if we go up a few lines, we have the Rashi. Rashi says, when Rashi defines who a Korov is, Rashi says, he's someone who truly can inherit. There ain't Korov mimenu. There's nobody closer than him. In other words, we've already defined this Korov as the closest.
It's the last phrase, Ein Lo Korov. Okay.
He's the number one Yerush.
He's the number one candidate.
Right, got it. Okay.
So he takes it upon himself to say, you know what? Worst comes to worst, I'm the one anyway. So l'chayru, you should give it to me, because we're not going to do a search around the country to find another Korov. I'm the guy. So, but you see, Rav, so Shmuel is okay. Rav, it takes such a hard approach and says a Korov could be someone, even though he knows he'll get it, but he's afraid that if the guy didn't die, maybe he'll lose his Yerusha or whatever. Let me get what I can right now. Shmuel doesn't have that thinking. In other words, it's basically, do you believe that this guy's going to do the right thing, or he's going to drain and clean out the property and destroy it and therefore make it worth less? So apparently, Rav takes that view. Rav takes a very sinister view of the events, and Shmuel. Now we're going to see that's modified a little bit, but basically that's the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, is whether or not a Korov is worthy to take over the property, and he admits that when the guy, it's clear he died, there is no obstacle. Of course, you give it to him. The big question is if we don't know if he died or not. And therefore, the relative himself may say, let me grab what I can today, because everything I take, I know I'll be able to keep. And if for some reason he comes back, at least I've gotten everything I can out of it. Shmuel says, you'll get anyway. Don't be a chazer. You're going to get paid like an oris. An oris gets a fair wage. You'll get the wage of an oris. Point to Rav, that's not enough for this particular Korov. He wants more. And therefore, Rav holds him back. So now we have the basic machlokes.
I think we've learned elsewhere an oris doesn't get a wage; they get a portion of the value of the product of the process. So therefore, they have a motivation to bring in a better crop.
Right. So you're right, David. Let's look at the lashon that we just said in the Rashi. Keminig arise ha'ir, like the minig of the arisim of the sharecroppers, in mechza, in shlish, in revia. In other words, you're right. It's not an hourly, it's a chelik. It's a chelik. If they get a third, if that was the minig, that's what he gets. If it was a quarter or a fifth, whatever the minig for those arisim, says Rashi, that's what he gets. So you're right. He does get. So the bottom line is he'll get well paid for whatever he's supposed to get, but Rav says it probably won't be enough. He'll want more. So he'll go ahead and drain the property dry. Instead of getting a third, he'll try to get a half because he figures, let me quickly not fertilize, not wait 6 months to let the property, the land fallow, whatever. Okay.
Rabbi,
So,
under Rob's view, what would you do?
we don't allow him in. We don't.
So who do you allow to take? If it's not him, then who?
Maybe you have to hire. You go out. You hire somebody to tend and pay him an hourly or whatever. In other words, he's like the normal wage earner as opposed to someone who may have ulterior motives. So
you immediately get a third party independent contractor.
Potentially, yeah, you get a third party, but you don't allow the Karev to come in. That's
They put it out to bid. Okay, all right.
Yeah. I mean, whatever we normally do to bring in the third party.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that's the machlokes. So now the shaila is, who do we hold like? Do we hold like Shmuel? Do we hold like Rav? Says the Gemara as follows. Very interesting. Meisvei. We're going to bring down a Bryson. Rabbi Lezer says, okay, Mimashma Shenemar. It says in Shemos, dealing with the how do you deal with a yosem and with a almana and a yosem if they have a husband or a father who's not available, is not here, how do you deal with it? Because remember, what are we talking about here? We're talking about where a guy disappeared, so he's not here. This fellow, this shavui, this captive is not here. Is he alive or dead? We don't know. The Gemara, Rabbi Lezer, wants to make a comparison between our situation and what the pasuk says. The pasuk says, and I'm going to quote in Mishpatim, it says by Kol almana v'yosem lo sa'anun, of course, that you're not allowed to exploit or you're not allowed to oppress a yosem almana. Imana ta'ana also imtzok yitzak alai. If he cries out to me, in other words, you oppress him, and the almana or the yosem, Shemoa eshmat zakosa, I will hear his cry. Now listen to what the pasuk says. V'chora api, Hashem says, my anger will be kindled. V'horakti eschem b'chorev, and I will kill you, meaning the oppressor, with a sword. Period or comma. What's the last half of the pasuk? And the women will be almanas, and the children will be yisomim. What's the first thing that comes into our mind before we even look at the Gemara? What's the first kasha? Why does the pasuk have to tell us that the wives will be almanas and the children will be yisomim? You just said, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to go ahead and kill the guy. Can't you and I figure out what the result of that is? If you tell me that I'm going to kill the oppressor, do we have to spell out that his family will be bereft and there'll be almonas and yisomim? Of course not. So there must be another reason why the Torah adds those words, because they are, in a sense, superfluous, right? Remember, we're counting words here. Torah doesn't give us extra words. Torah is telling us that if I kill you, then your spouse is going to be an almana. Hello? What else will she be? Of course she's an almana. Now, so that's what's the pshat here. Because it says, I know for a fact that the children will be yisomim and the wife will be almanas. Elamai Talmud Loma. What is the pasuk really telling us? What's going to happen here is this fellow will die, but we won't know if he's dead or not. He'll go into war and he will be struck down, and his wife will become what? An aguna. An aguna. We won't know if she can marry. Ve'ein menichen also, and the Bezin will say you can't marry. Ubeneim rotzim liyered lenichse avihen, and the children will want to inherit their father because their father's gone. They are the rightful heirs. Ve'ein menichen osan, and we're not going to allow them. Why? Because you can't be an heir to someone who maybe didn't die. So what? So now the Torah. Now we see that what Rabbi Lezer is saying is we have a pasuk in the Torah on something that looks exactly like our sugya. A guy is a shavui, a guy is a captive. He's not here. We don't know if he's alive or not. And the Torah Beferish says that if you don't know, you can't allow him to come in. Who is this a kasha on? It's a kasha on Shmuel. Shmuel says, no problem. Let the Korov come in. Let him handle it. Let him take him over because he is the logical guy. But wait a minute. He's not the logical guy. He may never be able to inherit. So how can you tell me in this Machlekes Rav and Shmuel that, okay, so that Shmuel says you can do this and this and this and this. The Torah automatically gives you a blueprint for what you're supposed to do in the case of like our Gemara. The Ein Menichen also. We don't allow him in to tend to the property because maybe he's not the proper Yerush. Shmuel, on the other hand, says you do allow him in. So it's a kasha on Shmuel.
But on the other hand, Rabbi,
Yeah.
if you look at Shmuel's position, the other position is, well, if he's there to inherit, if he's fit to inherit, then he has a vested interest. So who better will watch over the property than someone who has a vested interest?
Right. So that was Shmuel's thinking. Shmuel's thinking is that it's about vested interest, and he would be the best person. Why would he be the best person? Because in the back of his mind, he knows I'm going to do the right thing about this property because I'm going to own it. So I'm not going to ruin the property like Rob says that I'm going to just bleed it dry because I'm going to own it. But wait a minute, you're never going to own it because there will never be clarity as to whether or not you're a Yerush.
Well, but at some point, what evidence may come. Eventually, you are. If the definition is he is a Karov, is fit to inherit. While he may not inherit now, he eventually will inherit.
So Michael, you want to give schus to the guy, and I understand. But what you take away from this pasuk is that there will never be clarity because your punishment for oppressing an almana or a yasam is that there will never be clarity, which means that the potential karav will never be able to automatically become the owner. And with that in mind, it's more like Rav than it is like Shmuel. I understand your point. Okay, he is the karav. There's no one closer to him. At some point, he may get it. But if the Torah is telling us that there's a double punishment for an oppressor, one is he gets killed, and two, his family never ever inherits.
But why should they be punished for his deeds? In other words, why should the almana and why should
he got captured? It wasn't his fault. We had that situation with the Dakar, the Israeli submarine. It took many years for the Rabbanim would say that the women could remarry. Many years.
So Michael, you're asking a more general question. Why should they become victims? They weren't the ones who oppressed. Why should the children become victims? The teretz is, while it seems unfair, and I'm not going to argue that point, this goes back to the oppressor. You have to keep in mind that what you're doing is cutting your family off from any future Yerusha by being a Russia today. So the focus in this pasuk is not on the kids who are victims. Yes, the focus is how do we prevent them from becoming victims? By impressing the individual, he should never become a oppressor of almanas because the punishment is so deep. The knife is so deep that the thing that you want most is your children to inherit will never happen. So you could argue, Michael, and I wouldn't say you're wrong, but why are kids the victims of
Look
this.
at B'nai Korach. I mean, one would say that they should never, under this theory, then they should never have gotten anything because their father transgressed God in every single way, and yet they are acknowledged and acclaimed. So how can you do that?
Okay. So the answer is that we have to look at the words of the Torah in every individual situation. They're not all the same. And there are individual situations where the Rabbi Shalom says, "I'm going to punish you, and that will be the end of the matter. You will be punished, and then we move on with life." Almonas, oppressing an almana or a yasam, says Rabbi Shalom, is so egregious. It is such a terrible sin that you will bear the repercussions not only now, but your inheritance will bear the repercussion for all time. This again is the Rabbi Shalom's way of distinguishing, let's say, one Isser from another. In some cases, killing you or punishing you is sufficient. End of the matter. Yasam and Almana, the Torah says, they will cry out to me, right? The voice, they will cry out to me, and I will hear their pain and their crying, and I won't be satisfied, says the Rabbi Shalom Gabi Yachal. It's not going to be enough that I punish you. Again, that's a very difficult question to answer. Why should they suffer? You're right. Why should they suffer? Why should a woman be an aguna because her husband was a terrible guy? But here in this particular case, the Torah makes it so clear that that's what will happen. So if you have any feeling at all, you individual, you better realize what the ramifications of your chet is, and that. So again, it's not something that I can answer you and tell you, yes, this is the reason why. The Rabbi Shalom says this chet is such that to prevent it from happening, I'm going to punish you for generations. So before you go ahead and do such a terrible, terrible thing, know what the repercussions are. Having said that, we see that the Torah will not allow, Torah says we don't allow this Yosem, this child, to come in and tend the property. If we don't allow him to tend the property, then this Karev automatically can't come in to tend the property because he's like the heir. He's the heir. He's that child. He's that person. In which case, we see that the halacha is not like Shmuel. So we have a beferisha pasuk in the Torah which intimates that Shmuel is not correct. That's what the kasha is. So you say in Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, wait a minute, how can Shmuel say what he does? We see from the Torah that the Torah makes it very clear that the Shechem and the Yisayimim can never tend the property. What do you say? That's the kasha. All right, let's take a look at Rashi. The Omar Mar, the comment, we call him Shamal. Okay, that we did. Says Rashi. So the reason why it's in there because the women will want to marry, because the husband will take it into captive, so to speak. The children won't know if he's alive or dead. Like you said, the submarine goes down. Is he still alive down there? Did someone save him? We don't know. Because Bezdin does not allow her to marry. There are two kolalas on being such a terrible person. Achas shel cherev, that I'm going to kill you, and killing could be physical or maybe not. The achas shel shevi, because maybe the cherev means not actual physical killing, but killing in the sense that he disappears. So in other words, what we're telling us is even though it's a twofold punishment, first he gets killed and then the wives and the children suffer, the word killed doesn't have to mean physically killed. It could be that he's killed in the sense that his neshama is sort of excommunicated and he is in purgatory, in prison for the rest of his life. And that's why this question of agunas becomes such a complicated question, which we're not going to litigate here, is there are times when, and look, Chazal certainly do not want a woman to remain an aguna for the rest of her life. But there are times when it becomes almost impossible. And since we know in reality in reality, people have been declared dead, and then after many, many years, they reappear because no one had a havamina that they would be alive, and that makes her a Ashes Ish. So one Ashes Ish, to prevent one Ashes Ish, we cast a giant net over any suspicious disappearance. You can argue it's unfair, and typically that's a good argument. It's unfair that a woman should have to be held captive because of the uncertainty. But again, that's how the Torah. Now, the Torah looks for leniencies. Was there an aid? And sometimes we don't need two aid, and maybe one aid. I mean, we do try to find ways to undo the damage, but at the end of the day, it still remains a very serious matter.
So I'm curious, halacha l'maisa, in a case where somebody is gone, what is the standard? Is there a universal standard that applies to how long you wait until you make a declaration one way or the other, or is it strictly case by case, or is it an inexact science?
It's really inexact in the sense that our common law has a presumption of death. What is it, 7 years? I forget. Someone may remember. Different societies may say if someone doesn't appear for 7 years, he's considered dead, or maybe it's longer. Al pi halacha, there is no time limit unless there is an aid, and an aid. We see this even post-Holocaust or other situations where one can piece together. For instance, I'll give you one example where a particular town, let's say, had all of its Jews rounded up for deportation, and someone saw an individual who was in that roundup, right? This is the case, and where he was in the roundup, and then he disappeared with the group. Now, the group was then known to have gone to a death camp and exterminated. Did they see him killed? No, they didn't see him killed, but they know that he was in that group, and we know that that group went directly, say, to Auschwitz, and we know that that group was totally killed. Now, there, the halacha, and I'm not giving you a psak, by the way, but there are instances where A to B to C to D, the halachas say, you know what? We saw him at the camp, and we didn't know, or we didn't hear that anybody survived, but we didn't see him actually get killed. There can be some leniency, and those kinds of cases are most difficult to deal with, and halachically they have been dealt with, and I believe in some of those cases they actually have found a way to say, yes, we can declare him dead, even though no one saw the actual act, because you have to see him die, you have to see him be killed. So it's a heart-wrenching, and it's a very difficult thing to deal with, but
Rabbi,
when you piece those things together, the end result is, yeah, he died there because no one survived and we saw him go in. But Lamaisa, you need aid.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Thank you.
not to get too far off topic, but we had a speaker, this goes back a couple of years at Shomrei, who talked about the Aguna issue with 9/11.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was fascinating. They were doing DNA analysis, but it's exactly what you were describing, which is, the wife says goodbye to the husband. She knows he takes the train. He's presumably at work. Then the buildings come down, and
Right.
you don't know if he was in the building when the buildings came down, or if he had somehow gotten out beforehand.
Right.
And so they were doing, again, DNA analysis could verify that a person was in fact dead, but the other circumstantial
Right.
analysis they did to try and figure out, was he in his office when the building went down? Had he gotten out? Maybe his train was delayed. I mean, a lot of different things could have come up so that he didn't die in that building.
Right. And then keep in mind that he became so traumatized that maybe he lost his memory. So in other words, you can hypothecate that he did survive, but he doesn't even know who he is, or because he was so badly that he's now wandering or in a hospital or wandering around and doesn't know who he is, but is alive. So again, that's the chshad. unless you know where the high, like you say DNA, oh, they found his DNA, or they found a partial DNA, they could say, yeah, this is who that person was. But short of that, it makes this such a complicated and difficult area of the halacha that al pi halacha, we try our best to find to give closure. We really do. We're not cavalier and say, no, you got to prove it, we're not going to allow. We try everything, but sometimes everything just doesn't give you the closure. And we know that the halacha of Eish Ish is terrible. She gets married, she has children, they can become mamzerim. I mean, in other words, now you're opening up a can of worms that how do you deal with that? That's what
I think I was at that lecture, Yale, and I think they closed on every case that they were searching for because they had some remains of the person that they were trying to prove yes or no.
If they were fortunate enough to have even a little bit of something that would show
Right.
that he was dead, then they were allowed. So this is the difficulty of this whole shaila. But you see how now the kasha is, we remain with the kasha. So it's now a kasha against Shmuel. Why is it a machlokes? We see Shmuel's wrong because the Torah tells us in a pasuk that you're not allowed to have it. You're not allowed. So now the Gemara gives an interesting answer. Amar Rava, Leired v'limker tanan. That what the pasuk means is Leired v'limkar. It doesn't mean that he can't come down and tend to the land. He just can't sell it like a Yerush. In other words, a Yerush has free hand to do what he wants. I'm going to sell the property and I'm going to sell it to a developer and build condominiums, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that you can't do. But to go ahead and tend the property, even though the Torah says that a Yasam can't come down, it doesn't mean he can't come down to 10. That's what, so Rava wants to lighten the load here a little bit and say, no, the halacha can really be like Shmuel. It's not definitive. What we're saying is you don't treat him like a true Yerush. And what does a true Yerush do? True Yerush has total freedom on the property to do what he wants. Says the Gemara, okay, so now we have salvaged Shmuel, that the halacha can still be like Shmuel, because the pasuk doesn't mean that he can't come down at all. I mean, we're not focusing on the almana here. I mean, the almana is the almana. The reason we brought this down is for the purposes of the Yisayim, that the Yisayim can't enter the property. That was the point of this pasuk. And now the Rava says, don't jump to that conclusion, because I'm saying that he can't sell it, but otherwise he can. Okay, it is an answer, and we have to accept it. Now, let's go just a little bit further here before. Hava uvda benardoi. There was a case. A case happened in Nardoi. And what happened? Upashta Rav Sheshes Mihai Mishnah. And in Nardoi, Rav Sheshes gave a psak from this brisa that we just had to say that it's not like Shmuel. In other words, he took the conventional view. He didn't accept this view of Rava. And he said, so in Nardoi, he said no, that halacha is not like Shmuel. Amalei Rav Amram. So Rambam says, why do you say that? Dilma Leir Limketanan. Maybe Rav is right, that it's only that he can't come and sell it, but he can go ahead and what? And tend to the property. So why do you take such a harsh view? He asked him, Amalei. So here becomes a little bit of the famous joke. Dilma mipumpadisa at. Maybe you're from the town of Pumpadisa, the Milan Pila Bakufa the Machta, that they try to push an elephant through the hole of a needle. In other words, it's a forced answer. This is a euphemism for don't drain me a cup, that you're going to give me an answer that really has no meaning. In other words, I don't accept this Rava's position. Yeah, he can't sell it, but he can tend to it. Well, that's not an answer. So in other words, he's saying that he doesn't agree, and that really it's the halacha is not like Shmuel.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
going back to this thing about the period of time, I am a little questioning of something. If a person is lost or whatever it is, he's gone, he disappears,
Right.
whatever it may be, he's captive or whatever. And he's not around for X number of years.
Right.
If he is in fact captured by an army or something, if it was during the war, if he's in captivity for that many years, he's probably mentally, he's got all kind of mental issues if he's released or if they get him back.
Right.
The wife and the family are going to suffer indirectly either way.
Either way, yeah.
If he's returned or not. Why is it that Besdin can't put a time limit and then give a get or make it so that, you know, like she's free to remarry or do what she has to and break the vow?
So you want to argue that if he comes back totally mentally incapacitated, but he's physically back, that should not be a barrier to her getting married. Is that how you're thinking? That let's say he's there for 20 years, so he's probably completely destroyed inside and out, and therefore we should allow her to get married because basically he won't be a husband anyway, so to speak. Is that how you're thinking of it?
Yeah, I mean, or you
but
know,
I think you're saying even before he comes back.
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's what I
Right.
was hearing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that we say that if he comes back,
We don't know what
Based in
condition,
could
right.
no, but let's say if he comes back in this horrible condition, Based in could do a lot of stuff to try to force a get.
That's true.
But if
That's
he's not
absolutely true.
there, but they either know or think he's alive, then they can't pull a get out of thin air is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Well,
there's so many nuances potentially involved. You know, it's
but they're punishing a woman and a family.
Well, David, you're correct. And the reason, and again, this is not about fairness. It's totally unfair. There's no question that this is something that is beyond our understanding why the Rebbeinu Shalom says that. But the only thing we can understand from this is, as opposed to other situations in the Torah, where the Rebbeinu Shalom does not use such harsh language. In other words, you did something wrong, you suffer, nobody else. When it comes to almonas and yisomim, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, I will never ever forgive you. You, the one who is the oppressor. And therefore, you need to know the ramifications of what you have done, that you will take those who you love and make them, not only will you suffer, they will suffer. And that's rare. That's rare in the Torah. This is not something that happens all the time. But to the Rebbeinu Shalom, oppression of Yosem Almana is so egregious that the pressure on you is so great that if you do it, and then you and everybody else argues, but it's not fair. And it isn't. This isn't about fairness. Of course, it's not fair why a young child should be the victim of his father, or father in this case, having done something so terrible. But in the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom, there is nothing more vicious or nothing more terrible than a person who oppresses an almana or a yasam. And again, we can go round and round as much as we see, but we do see this is much the exception to the rule where the Rebbeinu Shalom punishes but doesn't punish the generations. Now, the same question, by the way, let me just throw this in because this has been a big question in halacha as well, is the question of mamzerus. So here you have a mamzer, a child who has absolutely no guilt in his condition, but the Rebbeinu Shalom punishes the person who created the circumstance for which a mamzer is born, and afilu dor asiri le'yavo b'kal Hashem. Why is that right? Why is this victim, this little kid who did nothing wrong other than one of his parents, his mother really, she had a child, and that's this problem, by the way. The aguna problem leads to the mamzerus problem, because if you're an aguna and you say, I'm an aguna, I don't allow it, I don't want it, I'm going to get married, she gets married, has a child, the first husband comes back, now you compound the problem. Not only did she sin, but she created a mamzer. and the mamzer can never come into Kahal Hashem. Why is that right? But again, this is, I mean, I can't answer for the Rabbanu Shalom. I can't explain why in the eyes of the Rabbanu Shalom, there is no more serious crime than the crime of taking a Yosem and Almana and oppressing them. And if you do so, you must bear the consequences for the rest of your life and their life, ad olam. And again,
Al Shilei Shim Al Ribeim is a little bit more general than that and goes beyond. That's not the only sin that's subject to Al Shilei Shim Al Ribeim, the third and fourth generation.
right, no, right, but these in
Yeah,
our
but with
life, in our daily life, this is what sort of hits us.
But even al shil hashim al ribeim, I thought that the understanding is that's if the children, the grandchildren follow in the footsteps of their ancestors and continuing to do bad, that they may get punished for a portion of the ancestors' bad deeds. But the mamzer issue is something where there's a total disconnect. They
Yeah.
did nothing wrong and they're
Right.
still punished.
Right. And that's one of the things we can't get our arms around it. We can't wrap our heads around why in this particular sense, the victim is someone who has absolutely no connection to the crime. But again, so the point that we're making here is that we want to give this answer, and Rava gives an answer, and the Gemara says it's not an answer. He says it's a forced answer. It's comparable to the Nusayim of B'nayim Kitani. My Hosam Klal Lo Af Hochanami Klal Lo. So in other words, there is no real way of answering this. So right now we have the machlokes, and we sort of see at this point, we're not finished, but we sort of see that the Shmuel can't be right. So let's look at Rashi. Over the Benardoi, the Bishavui Sheyared Yarshal in the Chassav, where a captive whose Yarshim went into the property. Pasha Rav Sheshes Mahamis Nisan the Ein Moridin, and Rav Sheshes says you can't go down because you see that the Yisraelim aren't allowed. Amalei Rav Amram Dilma Liyerev Limker Tanan Tani Tana the Ein Manichin Avalasas Valechol the Little Ka'arish Shapridami. So in other words, he wants to say the halacha can be like Shmuel because it's only for selling but not for tending the property. So he says the Milan Pila. You're really you're pushing an elephant here. This is such a like a you're kvetching here, like you would take an elephant and put it through a little needle. So okay, so where are we? So right now we're at the point where the Gemara doesn't want to accept this distinction between selling and tending. So l'chayra, the shaila remains, what do we do here? It seems that the halacha would be against Shmuel from this pasuk. Okay. Okay. So all right. So we're gonna stop here because now we go into it. Okay, we're going to pick this up, but it's off on a different trend. But you understand here what's going on is that this whole discussion has to do between Rav and Shmuel as to whether or not you can rely on a Yoresh to do the right thing, which comes a little bit as a surprise because l'chari you would think that a Yoresh, but again, Rav says that a Yoresh isn't necessarily the best person to come and inherit. And then we wanted to try to give a teretz and say, yes, but we can make exclusions because they can work the property but not sell the property. And the Gemara says basically it doesn't make a difference. Is when the Torah says you can't enter, it means you can't enter. And since we're saying that pasuk is a definitive word on this discussion, so we have to come to the conclusion as we stand now that the halacha is not like Shmuel, and that we're not allowing the Korah to come in. No one can come in, and you have to leave the property without any control. Now, the question of whether or not you can have a non-Korah come in, a regular sharecropper, separate issue. We're focused on the question of a Korah, and the Chayra may be a non-relative, non-related regular sharecropper just to tend to the property to make sure that it doesn't completely go to pot. would be acceptable. So that's how the Gemara comes to this conclusion. And again, now we're going off on a little bit of a tangent, but we'll bring it back to our discussion Mitzvah next week. So anyway, so we have a lot to ponder when we think of some of these really deep questions. And again, the issue of Guna comes to mind and all these questions. And we do everything we can to try to solve the problem, but sadly, sometimes the answer is it's not solvable. And this is where we have to continue to think about how we can make it better. But so next week we'll pick it up from here.
Sure.
Yeah.